You're controlling
I'm going to learn it.
It's supposed to be, this shows
Pass
this.
this to John. I emailed it to the committee. If the committee
Okay,
will
good to
take
go.
it under consideration.
All right, well, welcome to the Tuesday, October 25th meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee 2. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. Just quick run through our agenda. Tonight we will have under new business, well, first we'll have public comment if there are any members of the public here. Then we'll move into new business where we have some meeting minutes and invoices to approve. We will recap our recent community forum as well as a meeting that some of us had with the town planning department. We'll have a couple of pieces of business updating our OPM agreement to record a firm name change for Compass. Have a discussion about some potential impact of trail projects on some of our sites under consideration. We'll then review and discuss the updated test fit options on the sites under consideration, prep for our next community forum, which will be on November 2nd, and then just do a quick meeting schedule update and look to adjourn right around 8 o'clock. So the first item being public comment. I am looking out over the audience and seeing that at the moment there is no one here for public comment, so we'll leave open the option to revisit it should anyone show up and want to provide us with some public comment. The next item is approval of meeting minutes, and so we have one set of meeting minutes from, see, I went the wrong way, from September 27th. So does anyone have any comments or questions? Hopefully everyone had a chance to review the September 27th minutes. If there are no questions, I would see, go for it.
I move the subject minutes as written.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mike, second by Bill. And we don't have to do a roll call vote because we're all here. So all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Okay, it is approved and carries. Next, we have invoices. So we did, as a committee, receive the invoices this afternoon. So we have two invoices, one for Compass Project Management in the amount of $7,193, and one for Perkins Eastman in the amount of $52,960. Since we received them this afternoon, I will obviously entertain if anyone wants to delay approval of them for the timing. These are pretty standard invoices for work on the project thus far, so I think ideally we could get them approved as soon as possible, if nobody has any objections.
I move the minutes.
You already did that.
The invoices as requested, sir.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Tiffany, to approve, again, two invoices. Invoice CPM 116-06 in the amount of $7,193 payable to Compass Project Management, and invoice 95420-000-1 in the amount of $52,960 payable to Perkins Eastman. All those in favor of approving the invoices? Aye.
Yes.
It's unanimous, and so carries. And I'll sign these and get them to you, Mrs. Rothermick, before we leave, so you don't have to chase me down anymore.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Next on the agenda is a recap of the community forum feedback, and I believe I'm going to turn this over to Dan at this point. I think they're on.
Am I on? Okay. That's right. Thanks, John. Sure. So I just want to recap what happened at the community forum, at least some of the feedback that we got or that we received. I've listed it out here, and I think two of the highlights I think we should talk about are the consideration of operating costs as a factor in the site selection, and the other one was the consideration of vehicular emissions as a factor in site selection. We recommend that the operating costs do be added to the site selection criteria. We think that's a good addition. The vehicular emissions, we think that's a good consideration, of course, but by and large, all the sites are going to have a very similar profile when it comes to the vehicular emissions. No matter how we slice it, it's always going to look pretty much the same. So as a site criteria, we think that it's not really a good site criteria, but it is absolutely something that we should keep in mind as we move forward. Some of the other questions that came up were in discussions about the enrollment issues, MSBA reimbursement rates, which is a very common question that's asked at these meetings, the questions regarding the size difference, and then waste diversion. And on the Elm Street site, there was a question or a comment about where we might consider building the project. A big piece of that community forum was the sustainability and net zero potential goals. On this slide, you can see we did a couple of Mentimeter live kind of interactive exercises where we got feedback on what might be some of the criteria, the importance of some of these items. We're looking to basically gain some kind of insight as to what's important to the community overall. You can see that the future growth and flexibility scored pretty highly here on one of the criteria to assess the site. And educational program accommodation scored very highly. On net zero, design for energy scored really highly. And the other one was design for discovery tied with design for integration. The word bubble there, the bigger the word, the more votes it got. That's how that word the Wordle works. Solar and sustainability, you can see efficiency and environment were the leaders in that particular exercise. That was really great feedback. I think it was well done, and we hope to continue that discussion as we move forward. We also met with town planning.
Dan, sorry,
Yep.
before we move on.
Sure.
I just want to give the rest of the committee an opportunity if anybody has any comments, thoughts on any of what Dan just presented or the community forum in general for those who are able to attend and or view it.
Yeah, I'm curious, do we know how many people watched afterwards or were viewing at the time?
I think the number we got for viewing live was about 30. I don't think we have the numbers yet on how many have watched it subsequent to that. I don't know, we probably have to ask our friends at HCAM if that's data that we can easily pull, but that's certainly something that we'll want to take a look at. That's a good point.
There was also another 30 or so people in the audience too,
Yes.
beyond the group here.
Thanks.
I think it raises a question that is probably worth considering, which is 60 is an improvement from our community kickoff, but certainly still not high engagement numbers. And so I would also ask members of the committee if A, we think there's anything we should be doing that we're not doing that it could increase that engagement, or do we potentially think that this is just sort of where the community is at this point and haven't really connected to this project yet, and it's not necessarily something that we should be, like, we're always concerned about keeping the community engaged, but short of going in to people's doors and providing them the information, I'm not sure like if there's anything else we should be doing here.
You know, I think the time of year ebbs and flows people's level of engagement. I know that this was closer to, you know, curriculum nights that are held within our public schools. So that might have been, you know, people had already been out in weeks subsequent. I wonder about just like evening soccer practices and other fall sports that kind of take place around that time. I'm wondering if it has to do with more of like the time of year. And then also what age of community we're engaging. You know, I've said this before, and it's just kind of the stage we're in life, but a lot of the people that I've spoken to, that's dinner time for their family, and they have young children, and so HCAM was really great, and they appreciated having that opportunity to watch online or watch later, and I know that they have. So I think if we can continue to find hybrid opportunities, that's probably the best way to continue to engage people. But it's tough to get everyone there at that time in the evening.
I received similar feedback that folks are interested but struggle with finding a way to get to the meetings. And I know that that's difficult for us because we're trying as much as we can to get the word out and get people involved and get as much input as we can. So I think, you know, what we're doing right now is really putting the word out in so many places. I don't know that there's, like, aside from, like you said, going door to door, I don't think there's any other way we can get the word out that these are happening. But I think Dr. Kavanaugh sending out an email the night before saying, hey, we have this going on tomorrow, and every member of the school committee gets, or school community gets the email. So I think, you know, people have to know. It's just a question of finding a way to piece it into their schedule that I think is the struggle. So having it on HCAM is probably an enormous asset, no probably about it, because then they can watch it later on their own time. I guess the only piece that we might be able to do, and I know folks could always email, but if there's a way that they could offer input in a sort of more official capacity other than just emailing you, John, or emailing you folks, I don't know if there's a better way for us to collect that information, but is there something in place? Am I wrong about this?
So there is an email address inbox that's esbc2@hopkintonma.gov, and I would certainly encourage anybody in the community, if they have feedback, questions, ideas that they want to share and can't make the meetings, to definitely go through that channel. That's a channel that I monitor, and will bring any emails that we get to the committee. But the reason I haven't brought any is we haven't gotten any yet. So other than some of the questions that came in that during the forum. So. But that is probably the best way to get direct feedback, and we'll reply to them as well, but we'll also bring them into the entire committee, so that's always the best way. And that can also be accessed through the Elmwood School Project website, is also another way to get to that email address.
Perfect.
Just to follow up, the email that you send out, does it go just to the faculty, or does it go to the parents of the students at Elmwood?
It goes to both. It goes to faculty and staff, and then it goes to all the parents.
In the district.
Yeah, not
In the
just in
district,
Elmwood.
correct.
Not just Elmwood.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I'm a high school parent, and I get an email. Yes.
Great.
Yes, sir.
If If I may, I'll ask, is this the way it normally works, the Perkins Elmer guys, in terms of getting the community interested? Have we got too high expectations that everybody's gonna just jump on the bandwagon? Is there something we should be doing differently?
It usually does start out relatively slowly.
Yeah.
So I'm not very surprised
Okay.
and then it starts to gain momentum
Okay.
when you start to, especially when you start to make some of the decision points, or you get closer to those decision points, people become more interested and have maybe more things to say about those points during the process. So I'm not really that surprised
Yeah.
yet.
I think our closest point of reference was the Center Marathon School project, and
Yeah.
the interest in that was sort of preloaded
Yeah.
from what had happened before, so I think
Yeah.
we don't have that with this one. We're at more of a standing start.
I think the difference from that to now is the advent of the Teams and Zoom or virtual
Yeah,
platforms,
true.
and that
We
has
didn't have
increased ridership, not only in the initial view, but subsequent views too. And as we talked earlier, it's hard to quantify the people that are kind of following on their free time and as they go through it. But certainly we've seen over the last couple of years more participation remotely, where we used to see it more in person. So I would say don't be discouraged because they're not necessarily in the room, they're following along. And we will see it climb as the importance of the topics or the detail that we dive in will certainly bring more people to the forefront for discussion.
I will comment that I thought the presentation at the high school, the last, was outstanding. Everybody did a great job.
Just one follow-up also from the forum meeting. We did have a lot of really good questions around the net zero. We had a heavy amount of interest in it, and some members of the Sustainable Green Committee were at the meeting and approached me afterwards to see if we could attend one of their next meetings. So I think what we're trying to do is go to have some representatives go to the November 7th meeting of the Sustainable Green Committee so that they can ask some more questions about the net zero options and environmental sustainability, et cetera. If there's nothing else on that, then if you want to go on to the planning.
Town planning department?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great. So we also met with the town planning department prior to the community forum to talk about the sites that were under consideration. We, some of the highlights from that were, one of the comments they made was the disposition of the Elmwood School if the building is moved off that site. Noted that the site could adopt community zoning, again, if the building is relocated. Talked about the 71 Franklin Road site, which I'll show in the next slide. On site 11, there were questions about the permits, or told us that there might be permit issues or solar arrays may impact the use in a subdivision or a possible subdivision of that property. 21 talked about a potential frontage issue, but I think that's a non-issue because of the combining it with the other parcels makes it a no issue. 23, there was as many of these sites, wetness and wetlands were noted, and there was a comment about the house at 47 Hayden Row should be removed. So the Franklin Road site, this is the site of the old, is it the Liberty Mutual?
Liberty Mutual.
There's a total acreage on this site of about 15.8 acres. It's south of that gas line right away, which seems to be in run through a lot of these sites. There's about 10 acres that remain on the south side of that. On the north side, there's that lake, and that's going to create setback issues on the north side, plus that piece is a little too small to actually develop back there for any kind of building. So that leaves approximately, with the wetlands and the setbacks from the buffer zones on the wetlands, which is that green area with the hatch, that leaves about 9 acres developable, and that's lower than our target. Our target has been 10 or more, and we found that really 11 to 12 is the kind of the right spot for it. So that was one of the reasons why this site was kind of dismissed, is because it is, once you put in these different factors, it's a little bit too small. In addition, the other conditions on this property would be that if, after a purchase of it, the existing buildings, drives, all the infrastructure would have to be removed at another additional cost above and beyond the purchase of the property itself. So that's why, that was just a rundown of this piece of property and at least what we see from it right off the bat.
Any questions on that or on the town planning department meeting? For context, by the way, the town planning department meeting was a meeting that Mr. Kamalo asked us to have. I think general purpose is just to make sure that we have an ongoing communication with the various members of the town planning department, the conservation department, DPW, just to make sure that they're brought along in the process. So it was good to make those connections. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the update of the OPM agreement to record the firm name change from Compass Project Management to the Vertex Companies. Do you want to give us the background on this?
I could talk to that. So a few years ago, Compass Project Management was purchased by the Vertex Companies, which is a Massachusetts-based national firm. They had their own OPM division, although much smaller than ours. They moved within our office, and over the last few years, we've been merging the groups and slowly transitioning our name out to theirs. And so at the end of this calendar year, we'll formalize that transition and will be known as the Vertex Companies, and that will have the combined group of their OPM division and ours, both of which are still run under Tim. So even though we were absorbed by the larger group, our office actually runs that department within the greater company. So there'll be no change to what you see other than the fact that our logos will change, and I need to find some new clothes to wear. But Vertex will be the name moving forward. And so we've provided a one-page letter, which is called a novation, which is essentially recognizing the fact that the company formerly known as Compass will now be known as Vertex, and that'll apply to the existing contract you guys have approved for us.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none, I would seek a motion to record the owner's project manager firm name change from Compass Project Management to the Vertex Companies LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Bill. I think Leah got in there first, so we'll go with the second by Leah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, and so carries. The next item on the agenda is related to site selection. Actually, you know what? If nobody objects, I'm going to flip the order. I want to do the test fits so we can actually look at the sites before we start talking about the potential trail impact, because I think that would be helpful for context. So Dan or Bob,
Sure.
if you want to go to the test fits, that would be great.
Sure. You're all familiar with this slide, which is the where those sites are located within the community, the ones that are remaining, the 5 that remain, and here are those 5. There's, again, to remind everybody, the 67 East Main, the Hayden Row sites, the rear Pleasant Street site, and the Elmwood site. I guess we're skipping this for now, right?
Yeah, these are just recaps that we talked at our last meeting, which is, and also at the community forum where we put the criteria on that we presented to you and also presented to the public, and then the idea of putting it in a matrix here. But yeah, we can come back to this as well.
So I can start with each one of the test fits. We have to start with a program, and the program will evolve throughout the feasibility study. The 2 submissions to the MSB, the 2 initial submissions to the MSBA. So what we've done here is just list in very simple form the existing gross square footage, as well as using the MSBA's template, the gross square footage of a grade 2-3 school with projected enrollments, and for a grade 2-3-4 school. We did the same exercise for site program. We actually had some initial meetings with staff, with facilities, and with PE health and wellness instructors to put together what would be the initial targets for parking, car queue, bus queue, play space. It's not an exact science, but basically we needed to start and have comparable program, keeping consistent program to create the options, to vet them. This first, this test fit diagram that you're looking at is not actually a design of a school. it's a test. So what we've done is taken the total program, the count of spaces, the number of spaces, and just approximated it into a possible school layout. The idea in doing this is to go through the throes of breaking down the school into appropriate zones and getting a shape to a building so that we can see if the site will impact it. So again, it's not an actual design, but we wanted to break the school down into pieces and components and see if, as we tested out on all the different sites, if the site was having an impact on the design or forcing something to be further consolidated, more stories, or actually containing plenty of room. So in this plan that you're looking at right here, you'll see it's used for both the grade 2-3 and the grade 2-3-4 option. The difference would be, for the sake of testing, it would be a 2-story plan for the grade 2-3, and then an additional 3rd floor would be added for the grade 2-3-4. You'll also see on the test fit site plans that some of the major spaces at the ground level, the gymnasium, cafeteria, would also get a bit larger. But for the most part, it's pretty much a very similar diagram. So I think we can go
into those test fits. So there's a couple of, you've seen all these before, but there's a couple of things that we did from the last iteration to this iteration. One was a decoupling of them. So now there are separate versions of the 2-3 and the 2-3-4, so that you can start to see the differences in the parking area and the other areas that around the building and how that affects it, rather than seeing what we were doing before was the max size. The other things we've added are the drop-off for the cars and the drop-off for the buses, so you can see at least how we, at this point during a test fit, see those, envision that might happen on each one of the sites. So this is the 67 East Main, the 2-3 version. It meets all the criteria, total acreage of 58.909. We're using 13.3. So, and it does meet all the criteria for a 2-3. It also meets all the criteria for a 2-4 configuration. Using more acreage, you go from 13.3 to 17.8. There may be additional space, but we have to provide appropriate setbacks from the solar arrays and any other issues that come along with the solar arrays.
John, did you want to inform the committee about the outreach that's been done so far?
So, yeah, actually, I would defer to Mr. Shepherd, because I know that you did some of the outreach to the property owners of the sites under consideration that are privately owned. So if you want to provide.
Yeah, this particular site belongs to Mrs. Mezet. And I talked to her probably last Thursday just to make her aware that we were considering or looking at the site. This is part of the former Western Nurseries project and belonged to one of the two brothers. They subdivided the site for the solar array, as you can see, probably 2 or 3 years ago. She's groomed this particular site. If you look at it from 135, it looks like Western Nurseries. The grass is cut, everything is perfect. I'm not so sure she'd be really amenable to letting it go. But I wanted to let her know that we were talking about it, just so she thanked me. I told her that should we go any further, if anybody wants to walk the site, we'd talk to her first, and she was fine. Her house is there as well, and if you've seen that, it's like something out of Sturbridge Village. It's drop dead gorgeous. She's done everything to the nth degree. It's very, very nice. It sets on 3.5 separate acres. It's this sort of blocked out section in the lower right. But that's about it. In terms of the others, I also reached out to the lady that owns the site down on West Main Street. She owns that considerable piece of acreage that's behind Whalen Road, and she also owns a lot that goes out to West Main Street, which we use for access. I told her again that we were looking at it, and she volunteered that she had a local surveyor looking at it for potential subdivision. She just wanted to let me know. And I told her the same thing, that we'd keep in touch with her if it looked like something we wanted to do. There's a considerable amount of wetland on that site, as you probably found out. But then the other two that I spoke with, because we talked about it briefly, was the two private property owners on Elm Street and Wood Street on the corner. Mrs. Richardson was the big old farmhouse that you can see when you turn the corner, and the gentleman just put up that nice new white fence, and he said, "Does that mean I gotta get rid of my white fence now?" I said, "No." I said, "It just means that we're talking about the possibility. Don't be alarmed." Both of them took it the same way. They were very gracious, and they wanted to make sure that we kept them informed. That was pretty much it. It was a couple of them were harder to get to than others, but somehow we managed.
Thank you. Any questions about that?
Did anyone show unwillingness from the beginning?
No.
Okay.
No, wasn't anything like that. I told her we were a long way from having that discussion. I offered that the town does own land because they're paying for it in their taxes up on Hayden Rose Street, and they said, "Yep, I'm aware of that, where the Marathon School is." Yep, great. And this is just one of the options we're looking at. None of them said, "Don't bother me, don't have a call again."
That's something.
That's good.
Mike, you're the perfect person for that job, by the way. I don't know, like, yeah, it may have fell on your shoulders, I don't know, on purpose, on accident, but whatever it is, you're perfect for it.
But, no, it went fine.
Okay, great. So here's site 21. This is on one of the Hayden Rose sites, and this one we didn't decouple because there are other versions on this site, and we would probably use more than these two slivers if we were going to develop this. So this one, we only added the bus and car drop-off and verified that all the targets are met. Here's the expanded version of that site. So you can see that this amply fits the program. Total acreage of 31, and we've used 21.3 to develop the building and its needs at the 2 to 3 level. Slightly larger, using 24.8 at the 2 to 4, but still plenty of green space around this building on that site. Meets all the targets. Here's the rear Pleasant Street. One of the things we have done here is we've added the National Resource Conservation Protected Area onto this slide, which is that orange. Kind of looks like right on top of the road from the loop road that we were showing here. It is basically the exact same spot. And that I think would preclude us from putting any kind of vehicular road on this from that connecting to
She'll
the
have the
site.
same issue with the subdivision,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
This is the one that has the grade, right? Like the,
This
Yeah,
has the
whole-
grade and the wetland and the significant wetlands.
The whole side of our hill slopes down and drops right to there. That's where the water comes from.
Right, at the past meeting, we discussed that the play fields in this option have a dramatic drop-off with grade, and they're several hundred feet away from the school area.
yeah.
So this is that 2 to 3 option, and here it is on the 2 to 4.
One of the, when we initially discussed this site, one of the significant advantages, I know from the district's perspective too, was the idea of that road connecting through to the loop road. And what that diagram seems to show us, correct me if I'm wrong, is that road is an impossibility.
That is correct.
So I think the question for the committee is, absent the possibility of that road, is that a site worth continuing to investigate?
This site also was the one that has the wetland separation between the play area and the school itself. That's another drawback in the wetlands crossing. To get into the site, there's significant wetlands that have to be crossed.
And the road is pretty much the trail. So even though everybody uses the trail, you wouldn't be so happy with the road.
No, not as much.
Right, so if you weren't able to provide the road there, that's due to the restrictions, this would be one of the few sites that would only have one way in and one way out in terms of an access point, where the other ones at least have the option for multiple connection points.
And one way in and one way out, and the other thing about, from an accessibility perspective, but we lose so if there's a desire for, if one of the factors is the desire of locating the schools all near each other, we almost lose that effect because the route in and out is on the opposite side. So the fact that it's near the other schools it doesn't make it won't even feel like that because you can't get there.
And in this case, this is also on, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the one side it's hitting West Main Street, right?
Bottom of West Main Street,
Right near
just
the
before
light.
Whalen Road. No light.
Okay,
Whalen Road's on the left.
okay.
Okay, that's these houses right here. This is the bottom of West Main Street. And she owns this big, the
Right.
acreage, but she also owns this frontage lot that comes out to West Main Street. So that's how it could be accessed. Another disadvantage, I think, would be that it fronts like 17 single-family homes. So you got 17 enemies already to start with.
Unless they have kids that are going to go there, then it's really
Yeah,
easy for them
interesting
to walk,
part.
right?
Yeah, I was more considering on the map where it seems like it's very close to the 135 turnoff.
Yeah, it is. It's close.
So
It's at the
that,
bottom
you
of the
know,
hill.
When you start talking about early morning traffic, that's going to delay considerably kids being able to come in and out of the space.
In this updated test fit, do we meet the play target? Originally, we did not meet the play target space that we wanted in the first test fit.
It does meet it now.
It does meet it now, okay.
It just has these other
Other-
issues.
It meets it with having to cross the wetland.
It meets it with having to cross the
Yeah.
wetlands.
Right.
Yeah.
And what would that mean, literally? Would there be a path or a bridge or?
I haven't walked on the site. I don't know how wet this site is. There could be a bridge that would need to be built over it in order to, oftentimes you see that, the conservation commissions do require you to build a bridge with limited pilings or touches.
There's a
through
perennial
it.
stream that runs through this property. It's not an intermittent stream. It dries up in the summer. It runs all year long. And the water comes out just about the point which we'd be accessing it off of West Main Street. There's a little bridge culvert there. And it goes across and ends up in that big swamp across from Elmwood, behind Golden Pond.
Okay.
That's where all that water ends up.
Oh, I know what you mean. Okay.
There's a lot of water.
So we're going to trade a gas line for a pond.
Well, this doesn't help our transportation issue.
Okay.
Not at all.
Operationally, does the elimination of that road make this that much less attractive for the school? Yeah.
It does for me, yes.
Yeah, operationally, I think this is probably the worst decision.
No sewage in the road. They have gas, but
What did you say before that, Mike? Sorry. I couldn't
No
hear you.
sewage.
Oh,
So should we remove this from consideration? Doesn't sound like I haven't heard anybody
make it
in
easy
favor.
so you don't keep beating the dead horse.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's remove 23? 23. Let's remove 23 from the list.
Probably a good idea.
Moving on to 28. This is the site that we all know next to the marathon. The only addition, one of the other additions to this is we did go over into the adjoining property to add that play field. We're breaking over the boundaries now because the boundaries are just lines, and we really could benefit from adding that space to this design. So we did add that play field. This is that 2-3 version, and then this is that 2-4 version. You can see the parking area and all those areas got larger.
So I have a question with this one, right? We know that Marathon has too many kids as it is. We're talking about a new playground because there's not enough room for the children to be playing outside. So if we're removing acreage from the Marathon lot, aren't we sort of constraining what we can do with the growth of that school? Like, are we affecting our ability to react to further growth within the Marathon school?
When you look at the configuration this way,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so we'd be constraining ourselves and, yeah.
When you say when you look at the configuration this way, do you mean as opposed to using the zero Hayden row?
Yes.
Okay.
I think what I understood you saying was that in this particular configuration, what he did was take a portion of the land that is technically Marathon's.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, I just was trying to, I was trying to just distinguish
Yeah.
what Mrs. Rothermick was sort of presenting as the alternatives. So, right. So the sort of advantage, if you will, which I'm not sure it's a positive or negative, to that one is we sort of, the town retains more of that zero Hayden Row land to potentially use for something else. The downside, as you're pointing out, is it potentially restricts anything that happens between those two schools from a growth perspective.
Could I add, though, we're using 16 of the 28 acre available acreage on this lot, so the other 20, I mean, the remaining 12 acres or whatever it is, roughly, is still town-owned land.
It's
So if
the
we need-
marathon.
Right,
That's
so
what
if
it is,
we
yeah.
needed to expand for field space or playground space, we wouldn't be stealing from Marathon necessarily because we do have 12 more acres potentially to work with, or am I wrong about that?
What, 129 is Marathon, correct me if
Yes,
I'm wrong.
that's correct.
So this is using the remaining acreage
Oh,
of
okay.
that whole lot. So
Okay.
129 Hayden Row is Marathon now plus Elmwood.
With
Yes.
28 total available acreage, including what Marathon already sits on.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
But in terms
that's
of
on.
town-owned land, so how much of zero Hayden Road does this use? Because you said you're jutting.
It's only
into
using that one field, so it's probably about 3
Field at
acres
the
of
bottom.
that now.
3 acres and so leaving how much on zero Hayden Row?
I'd have to go back to
Available.
the
Is that what you're
Total-
worried
Yeah.
about?
I think
We still have
it's-
something left.
Total
Yeah, you
acreage
20,
for,
28-ish,
Yeah.
about 28 acres left. If
Now-
you use about 3.
Now, the different, I mean, I will just say, there, and this probably isn't, I don't know if this is within the scope of this committee, but there's a bit of a strategic difference between those two options, because if you go with that one, you have the 28 acres left on zero Hayden Row right up until somebody uses it for something else.
Right.
Whereas if you use the zero Hayden Row option, the space in between, it would be the school's space.
Yep.
I think the other thing with this option is the two schools, I mean, they're not really, once again, from a growth perspective, they're almost on top of each other. So trying to grow one school or the other, you would end up really having a tight space there. It would be difficult to grow in any particular direction, and especially for Marathon in this
Right,
situation.
you're boxing it in.
Yeah.
No, I think this is excellent feedback, the design team can churn through. As Dan noted, we're starting to eliminate the idea of the parcel separation. I think there's an ability for a modified version of this option to float the proposed site further away from Marathon to
Yeah.
preserve that.
The fields could be
space.
closer to Marathon, for example.
Right,
Yeah.
right, the non-built up.
It's flip-flop.
Yeah. It's almost like a hybrid of this 21 kind of idea, is using more of the space going towards where this property goes off the Marathon site to try to give it some more breathing room.
Would it make sense in any further design or future designs where you would have mixed use of fields for both schools, if you were to put fields in between them instead of fields south of the potential new school? Was that looked at?
That is what's happening on this expanded. Those three items there are multi-use fields.
Okay.
That are between the two schools. That was the idea here. But yeah,
there-
you could slide the building down and then flip the field over.
Yeah.
So the field would be in between the two schools.
But there, it looks like it's substantially larger than.
It is. It's that
Okay.
entire area where the other one is taking
And
up.
is that the purpose, that Marathon could potentially use that as well?
That was the idea, is that they would be shared. They could be shared use between the two.
It seems to me that site 21 expanded 2 to 4, where it uses different means of egress off of Hayden Road Street.
Yeah.
A town owns a house there, which is not worth anything now. But potentially to this school, you could have two means, getting in, getting out, buses on one, parents on another, maybe help the traffic a little bit. It raises that potential anyway. And, you know, buses go in one way, parents go in the other way, you know, some kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's always the potential, and that lot's like 90 feet wide. It isn't a big frontage lot.
No, I think it was,
Pretty
we
tight.
figured out it was basically the road in.
It'd be tight just to
Yeah.
get a roadway in there. But, it wouldn't be anything like we have going to Marathon. But the reason we made Marathon was so big was because of this potential. We knew that when we did it. And, you know,
And the Marathon Road, so like leading into here could be used as a queue as
yes,
well.
no, it could go, the
Yeah.
road could go right around, come back in. This one could go back out.
Yeah.
It could be, you know,
This gives you the best option of getting the queue off Hayden Road,
Yeah.
combining
yeah.
the access of all the parcels.
You're talking about 21 expanded, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's what it's.
This one, which has that second road, that extra road coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can certainly look at something in between these and look at an option that captures that road, pushes everything over, puts the fields in between, but leaves more of the property undeveloped in the back as a third test here.
Does it make sense for us to keep 129 on there to continue to explore if 0 and
It's a good question.
if our fear is that we're going to build them too tight together?
Does it have to be, I guess the question is for Perkins is, do we have to be that distinct about it? Or are we basically saying like, take that part of, take that plot, the 0 plot, and figure out a number of different options that might be workable to balance those things?
Yeah, you can-
Yeah, I think that is.
As a town, you can redraw your lines, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
to suit the needs of the
Yeah.
project, right? So I think keeping the blank canvas open and, you know, temporarily erasing those lines to find an optimal solution makes sense. And Perkins can do several iterations of that and bring back to you as you hone in on what's the best placement for the building, and then you fill around it with the parking in the fields.
Yeah. And hopefully based on the feedback on those here, you can kind of see what some of those levers
Yeah.
are and come up with some.
I think
different
this one that site 21, the 3-lot one, I think we're not gonna continue with that. Because and it seems like
Oh,
we
yeah.
should combine this into
Yeah.
one site called just Hayden Road.
Exactly.
And just
Absolutely.
drop the other
Yeah.
iterations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was,
Is there any limitation, going back, just thinking about the fields and potential play areas, is there any limitation on what type of fields you could build? Do they have to be age appropriate for the school age you're building? I'm thinking in the future, would you be able to build larger fields, like a larger soccer field, a larger something field that could be used by other age groups on that site? Or do you have to build something that's age appropriate, size-wise?
I think
Are you limited?
I don't think you're limited. You would be able to build whatever you think is appropriate for that site. If you, they're looking for a multi-purpose field, is I think what they want for, and I think if it's a full-size field versus, and I don't think there's any desire for something smaller.
Okay.
I think if you decided it was a full-size field, that would be fine.
What we did here, talking with the physical education, health and wellness folks, was a certain number of classes that need to be out using fields. They don't have an exact size, but there really needs to be zones for PE, for play.
I think the things that I get concerned by is, like I said, the construction. So we've built wings, entire wings onto buildings in the past few years. So space for that. The fact that Marathon's pre-K to 2. And I don't know how far we want like our pre-K and kindergartners to be walking to fields, right? So if they're built too close together, we can say we want to expand fields this way, but that might entail a ton of walking for our little kindergartners or our first graders if they're going to go play in that area. So I don't know what the preference is there, but I would think that we would want them closer. So I think fields in the middle make more sense in that scenario. I think those were my 2 big ones. I don't know how much we can plan for growth, right? But you know, as the school grows, we're going to need more space for them to play. So having forethought into, you know, where could a new field go in a way that still complements the school or something like that would be great.
Okay.
So John, is the suggestion to take 129, 0, just take these slides and kind of make them into one slide? That way it just gets less confusing as we're kind of looking through it.
I think, I'm not sure if it's one slide, but we're basically taking 129 and 0 and making it one site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Perkins is going to go back and look at possibly delivering a few different options within that
Within that area.
Instead of having
combined
these,
site.
like, we
So we
keep
might still have
separating.
3 slides, but we're looking at it as one property,
Yeah.
as opposed to one property, another property, and then a combined property.
Yeah.
It's all combined.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, there's no reason to not do that, and then
Yeah.
you'll see versions that will fall over into the other site, right, or the other property, they'll be the close version or a further version, rather than having what we have now, which is basically we're trying to stay within property boundaries that
Right.
don't really
Yeah.
exist.
That don't, yeah, they're, are an
They're
actual
not
property
really boundaries
boundaries.
we
Yep.
need to stay in.
With keeping in mind some grade outlines, just so we know that we're spilling into 0, or, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like, just something.
yeah, we could put like a dash line
If
underneath or
somebody
something
asks
so
the
that we
question,
know that
we'll be
we're.
able to delineate, like, yes, we're on 129, but we stole 10 feet of 0 or whatever,
Yep.
2
Yep.
acres of 0.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll reduce the number of different Hayden Row
Yes.
sites that are really actually the same site. That we-
Yeah.
Okay, so we move on to the existing site. I think we've all seen this before. This just gives us the existing conditions as a lead-in to the test fits on this site, of which there are numerous. This is the 2-3 on the site without any additional property sitting in the back. You can see the red outline of the existing building is really close to the new construction here. And it's basically building out towards wood. Here's the 2-4 option. It's larger and just kind of gets even closer to the existing building. Here's taking those 2 pieces of property in the front. This is a double wing version because the triple wing version doesn't actually fit in the front here with taking those 2 pieces of property. But it does meet all the other criteria, and it does avoid being built on the gas line. And here's that 2-4 version, what that looks like. This kind of shows that with the 2 extra pieces of property, you can meet all the goals and you can keep the existing building operational during the construction. So that's a big benefit of acquiring those 2 properties, is that it probably gives you enough room to be able to perhaps do the project without disrupting the existing school.
So the first, sorry, go ahead, Leah.
No, you got it.
So the first 2 would disrupt.
The first 2 are so close to the existing building.
You would have to move the
There is
kids.
going to be disruption, as the fences for
Yeah.
the construction site are gonna be feet away from, and it's not that this isn't done, I mean, it can be done. It's just gonna create, for sure, a,
So when you
disruption.
define disruption, though, would we still be using the existing Elmwood School as a school during the construction of this?
Yeah, it's possible.
I mean, we'd have to do
Not
a
ideal,
deeper dive.
but
Right.
yeah.
You know, you would lose the circumference of vehicular access around the building, right? So, you know, we've built buildings that are 50 feet off the existing building or closer in some cases. So it can be done. There's noise disruption. There's making sure you have proper police and fire access. can you still achieve the parent pickup and drop off with buses, or is there an alternate location further from the school, say in the existing ball fields as an example, where you would have to pull everybody away from the building to get in and out of it? You know, there are sub options of phasing that we would have to look at with any option that happens on the existing site.
During the construction, what outdoor access would the kids have?
Under this particular option here, you know, they would still have the access around the back.
They have their playground in the back, but I would make a guess that the baseball field would turn into a parking lot during a phased construction project.
The
and lay down area.
Parking for parents, the pickup and drop off, and lay down area for the contractor would
Yeah.
consume the ball fields for the most part.
Yes.
So you'd essentially be limited to the back, but we would certainly study that in greater detail.
Which has an educational effect, because right now those ball fields are used for PE scheduled classes, and the
Yeah.
back is used for recess.
Right.
Yeah, be interesting because they're set lower than the road as well
Yeah.
going in, so that'd be an interesting
Where is the,
access.
on this site we're looking at, 2 to 4, where is the play area? You're saying there's swings in the back? I mean, there's not a lot of play area here, is there?
No,
Oh,
there's
no.
not.
They're there, but there's not much to them.
Tiny.
It's behind the building.
3 swings and a.
Yeah.
Like 4
So Bill,
children
I
each
think
stage,
in one of our slides from maybe the last meeting,
Hold on,
there's about 25,000 square feet of play area back there.
it's that green
And
triangle.
what Perkins Eastman has recommended is 65,000
Yeah.
as a minimum. So the kids don't have much room to, when we were talking about fields earlier, the reason why we just have open green spaces for kids to run, you know,
Okay.
kind of play different games doing that. And that's the opportunity that they really lose at Elmwood right now.
And what is the assumption, if this were to go forward, what is the assumption that happens to existing Elmwood? I see it here in red. Is it,
Oh, you mean in these versions? I think the assumption would be the building would be demolished.
Demolished.
Yeah.
Yeah, I assume that would be the case. But also, if you went to a 3-story configuration, I know this is just a graphic thing we're looking at in terms of getting the square footage in, but it's cut down the footprint, all right, of where potentially the new school would go. You have the potential of another access off of Wood Street,
Yep.
which can't hurt in terms of traffic flow. And if the school goes away, the existing one, you've got all the play area you'd ever want.
that's what I was
Yeah,
asking.
it meets the goal.
Parking for the new school could be out part of this ball field. I'm kind of reluctant to go after a couple neighbors to sell the house to make our situation better. It's just fraught with all kinds of hate and discontent, which I don't want to deal with. If we could figure out another way.
So
And I don't have, I've asked this several times, is these are kids are, 2 years old, second grade, 4th grade. Can they do a 3-story school? We got elevators, we got stairs. Is that unheard of, 3 stories?
No.
Well, that would cut down the footprint, would it not? That would help us.
It should. I mean, right now we're showing all the 2 3s, as Bob mentioned earlier. The 2 3s are 2 stories, and the 2 4s are 3 stories. Or at 3 stories.
I see the only potential on the site is that beautiful pine grove.
Yeah, that is the only
I try to
place.
tell the old timers in Carl, it's just like grass, they'll eventually fall over if you don't cut them down.
They
But
will.
on that particular site, it looks like the only place you could put a school without dividing it by the pipeline, which nobody wants. You could still maintain the ball fields out in the front. And true, when the old school went away, some of that would become parking, but I think the space would work if we were more creative. And yes, there would be disruption. A lot of communities have what they call a swing space, where in Brookline, when they did a school, they moved them to the Lincoln School, an old school, but MSBA doesn't want us to use our old school. So we don't have that option. But I think you could work around it. And it would cost us more to work around it. But,
Dan, but what you're saying is that although it's a test fit, this test fit is the same. So if this was a 2 to 4 school, it's just this same test fit with another story added.
Those community spaces, the gym, the those are all larger too.
Yeah.
So the footprint for those is bigger as well.
Okay.
yeah.
I think one of the things you brought up there, Mike, that is going to be an important consideration on our criteria is there are going to be aspects of doing this that are potentially more expensive than
Could be more expensive, yeah.
so I think we're going to have that's a factor we'll have to look at as we go through these
think-
site selections too. Is that some of that work might end up being more expensive,
We're gonna,
but we have to see.
on Hayden Road, we're gonna have this outrageous traffic fight. I know we are. And we're gonna have a little traffic fight here too, but not quite as bad. I guess it boils down to which kind of fight you wanna have. And that's what, we make these kind of decisions, and hopefully the town will agree with whatever it is. But personally, I think if you took traffic out of the equation, Hayden Road is a no-brainer. We own the land, we don't have to go to anybody. It's fairly flat, we know what it's like, built on half of it already. What I would love to do is hire some fancy traffic engineer to figure out how to unscrew the traffic, so when we go to town meeting, we say, this is the solution.
You got us covered there, right, Dan?
I'm not sure he's fancy, but I hope he's fancy enough.
That way the kids would say at Elmwood, and Norman and the selectmen would figure out what to do it 20 years from now. And we wouldn't have to tear it down, let them do it. But I think we own the land up on Hayden Road Street. If we can get around the traffic thing,
Yep.
it's kind of a no-brainer, I think. And from the school's perspective, all the stuff is in one pot, and it's, easy to take care of. We just gotta get around the traffic.
Yeah. 'Cause
So
to be
for 39, what I'm hearing is maybe we look at the 2 to 3 as a 3-story to try to decrease the footprint?
I haven't heard everybody say they didn't want a 3-story. These are kids, 2nd grade to 4th grade. They could do 27 stories. And there's an elevator anyway, we know that, at least one.
There's at least one.
So, except for the teachers having to hike up there once in a while, I don't see a problem with it. I think energy-wise, it's gotta be cheaper to run, there's less roof to leak, there's a lot of good things about going taller rather than bigger. Less footprint gives us more of the space we want for the gardening and the athletics and all the good stuff. But
Okay.
I don't know,
Well, we can certainly do that and
Yeah.
have another test fit
Kinda
with
see what it
that
looks
kind.
like.
Let's see, and then I think it might make sense to also add, at least start a phasing idea here to see what that's gonna look like too,
yeah,
or could look like.
it can't hurt. I don't think.
Yeah, to be fair, at least from my point of view, if we didn't have to look at this, I would already be pushing against it. I don't like the idea of generations is a weird word to use here, but Elmwood is only 2 years. That means we're gonna have a whole set of children who never see green space at all if we go with this.
Oh, that's right.
There's gonna be, I don't know how many years of children who will be going through Elmwood for their 2-year stints and never ever really have anywhere to play outside. They
And one of
won't
them
have
would be
any
my granddaughter.
outdoors
She'll
and-
give me help for the next.
So to me, that's a huge consideration. If this was, kind of a traditional K through 5, I probably wouldn't be as concerned, but the idea that the whole time these children are in this school.
I agree.
Yeah,
If we can
it's-
possibly get around the traffic thing in some kind of reasonable way, I think our solution is much easier. So,
I think while it's a requirement for us to look at this, I agree with what you're saying, Leah. I think that the nice thing about us having to look at it though is
Yeah.
we're going to be able to go to the town with that story, right? We looked at what would be involved in actually doing a new construction, and here are all the implications, including these children who would go through that school and never see green space or go to school for 2 years on a construction site. And I think that those are, the fact that we will have done the full due diligence will make it easier to get whatever solution we arrive at passed by the town.
But all these
It's
kids
also
will be big
interesting,
contractors
too.
in the future.
What's interesting too is these are the same students who are gonna live through the marathon wing. Right, like the wing that's being built at Marathon, they're gonna have the construction of that wing,
Yeah.
and then they go
So
to
they won't
Elmwood
know
and
any
they get
different.
2 more years. So they're gonna be used to the jackhammering and everything else that goes on.
But if we can sequence it, can we do Hopkins when they're there too?
Yeah, let's
And
just
then
keep
just
it
keep
going.
moving
Let's
it
just see how
along?
many-
Probably would.
Well, and there'll be a whole crew of teachers who are going to develop nervous habits from their children that have all this energy that hasn't been spent on the playground, and then, you know, there'll be this mass departure of second and third grade teachers for a couple. It's going to be tricky, so yeah, keep that in mind too. The kids need to expend some energy during it.
And part of me thinks, you know, when we had Marathon, you all had the forethought to have a place where it could expand, right? So that was part of the architecture and the design, was that there will be this place where you can build the wing, and there's plenty of space for it, and it's the whole site is built around that idea. So when I think about that, I'm like, would we want that for Elmwood as well, for like the new Elmwood school? Would we want an expansion possibility, a space where we could architect growth? And if that's the case, would a site that is this type allow us to architect it in a way that allows us growth, right? Like, I don't know the answer to that, but that's, you know, every time I look at this, I'm like, we've used up all these spaces that we keep, like, you know, the new wing in the high school, we left a space for a new wing in the high school, we've used it now. You know, the Marathon, we left a space for a new wing in Marathon, we've used it now. So with the growth that is happening, you know, in the town, I feel like that has to be a consideration of where could we, should it happen, you know, build onto the school in a way that preserves play areas, preserves the space around it, etc.
And that is, not to jump to another topic, but that's on the site criteria, I think, isn't it?
It's a criteria, and
criteria
we'll need to
potential for
demonstrate
expansion.
where you can
Yep.
add a wing, you know, should it be needed for additional
Right,
cost.
and I know that
Yeah.
this is a test fit, so the shape doesn't mean anything yet, but just, it seems vital to me.
Sorry, other questions on those test bits? Because I know we want to look at Renault too.
Yeah, the Renault.
The only question I have on this, you know, Mike, with your conversations with the two property owners there, they didn't say no.
No, they
But-
and the conversation was very brief. It was pretty much just telling them that we were talking about it.
Yeah.
They wanted to find out about it on TV.
But with all the discussions we've had on this and all the potential negatives, or maybe the real negatives, that would make it easier just to move on if, I mean, at what point would you representing the committee go to them and say, you know what, you're on the short list here, so can you give me a better idea, are you interested? Because if one says no, then none of this even matters, does it? Because it includes those two properties. At what point do we do that? Or does it even get to that point? Or does it have to get to that point to be able to have a decision on this?
That's a send Norman out deal.
Yeah.
Norman is the guy that runs the town. Norman is the guy that should approach the people and feel them out, see what they think. You know, the second one, the guy with the white fence, I only talked to him last night at 7 o'clock. You know, so he said, his comment was, do I have to take down my white fence? We just laughed. And the other lady seemed less inclined. Will the town just take it? I said, no, the town won't just take it. You know, there'll be you have to get an appraisal, and the town will get it, and see if it's fair, and you'll be presented with it, and, you know, whatever the legal, political stuff that goes around that, I don't know. But neither one of them said, no, you can't do it. But I think if Norman, representing the town, went to them and said, you know, it depends on how much we feel about it. I don't want to put them through this anxiety
Right.
if this thing is not going to float anyway.
Right.
Well, that's kind of my question, is that how do we approach this as a committee? Do we look at it on the test fits we have and not even worry about that? Or can we make a decision at some point without even going to that level of discussion with these landowners? That's what I'm trying to understand.
My way of thinking, if you can solve Hayden Road Street, this becomes a non-issue. And, you know, just, I don't know if it's worth getting two families, you know, one of them, you know, at the end of the day, the town has a right to take it. But of course, it would never come to that, you would hope. But my question is, why put them through that?
Yeah.
Well,
We've got a perfectly viable spot if we can solve the big T issue.
and why put them through that? And it's also to that point, there's a variable, there's a town meeting variable that you add, right? If this gets contentious in any way, the town would the town meeting would have to approve the acquisition of the properties,
Yeah.
so we're
And you know, we got
potentially.
that fight at town meeting.
Right, we're potentially creating a fight we don't want to have. I guess to that point, maybe I'll pitch it back to Dan and Bob and Jeff, which is, what's the timeline here? So, when we think about getting to a point where we might want to have a deeper conversation with them, right now, they're aware it's under consideration. We're looking at test fits. When are we going to get to the point where we would have to consider advanced conversations if we were seriously thinking about those locations that would require it?
Good question. So, over the next 4 months, this committee is going through and churning through, these options and future refinements of these options. You'll get through a submission to the MSBA on December 9th is our next near-term milestone, where we take this longer list and then submit to them the ones that we want to do a deeper dive on. So if it was still on the table, I think after that December submission, that's the point where you might want to consider engaging those conversations, because over the month of December and January and into the beginning of February, this committee would be debating which is the option that you would ultimately want to recommend to bring back to the town. And so by the end of February, you would have a solution that you want to go forward with. Now, you brought up the point of the extra town meeting step. That complicates things because it's an extra step. If you own the land outright, you can follow along the normal process of the overall schedule. If you add that in, do you do that at the spring town meeting? So you have assurances that you can then continue the design process and move forward. So that would ultimately, put pressure on that upcoming town meeting if it require procuring the additional land and then getting through a purchase and sale or whatever the agreement would be necessary to bring information to town meeting.
Right. Which would have to be done, you're talking about closing a warrant in April. So that would get pretty tight. A relevant part of the question, though, when we talk about all these submissions, is the traffic study. So, we talk about that Hayden Row piece. I think Mike has vocalized it, but I don't think he's nearly the only one that's considering the impact of traffic on that particular site. And so the viability of what we need from the Elm Street site probably hinges directly on what we can look at from a traffic perspective. So do we have a sense of timing on that?
We have the traffic engineer queued up to come to the next meeting of this group to talk about his preliminary findings and the preliminary memorandum that he's going to put together in advance of that.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is we don't necessarily need to solve those additional conversations yet. We're going to hear more about the traffic at our next meeting, which may have and see some updated test fits at our next meeting, which may help drive us in one direction or another. If the Elm Street site with the additional land plots are still in the picture by that December 9th submission, we'd really want to be having elevated conversations. Is that fair?
For the, if I may, for the benefit of the whole committee, we went through the same thing with Marathon. We looked up at the center school. It was going to be out and back, as you may recall. Then it was going to be down at Elmwood, but it was going to be split by the pipeline. One day, the owner of the land that Marathon School sits on came up to get some kind of building permit. I forget. Somebody I went to school with. Would you be interested in selling the land out there across from? Sure. How much? Well, I forget what the number was. That was it. It was done in 5 minutes at the building department office, only because Susie wanted to unload it, and they had no other plans for it. So that kind of thing happens. That's how we got Marathon. And at the same time, Tadaro was having issues with his market and decided to sell a bunch of land to the town. So it's the very same town meeting we bought both of those parcels. But the viable space, Susie's space out there where Marathon is, it's not the greatest piece of land. And to tell the truth, the reason it snugs up against to the right is not because we are thinking about future. We were thinking about future because of the road. That's why the road's so big. But it stacks up there because that's where the best pile of dirt was. And that's where the best digging was. And it turned out really good. Not that the other part wouldn't be just as good. But a lot of it is just, you know, there's not a lot of science. I'm just hoping there's science involved in the traffic. And if the traffic engineer can work with the bus lady, and the bus lady can work with the moms that drive their kids back and forth to school, we can solve the traffic thing. I know we can.
So make sure that traffic engineer is prepared for Monday.
He's gotta be ready.
Well, I'm gonna let him know tonight.
Is that a time to get fancy quick?
So I think we were gonna look at the Ad Reno designs, and then we'll talk about site selection criteria and what the
Then we'll
steps
go
are.
back to the site
Yep.
selection criteria. So this next slide shows the Ad Reno, or at least the test fit for the Ad Reno on the site. This is one of the two versions that we'll walk you through as far as the plan. It does meet the criteria, it uses up a substantial part of the acreage to do so, but it does meet it.
So what we're looking at here, there actually are dotted lines. I'm not sure if you can see them where there's demolition, but this is the existing Elmwood School, and there is a bold line around new construction. What this shows is basically a new 2-story, 16 classroom wing. It's at an angle in the back. And that's, it also has a new gymnasium to the lower right, and it repurposes the existing gymnasium for a cafeteria, building a new stage within it. It demolishes the modulars, or removes the modulars, and demolishes what is affectionately known as the book room, kind of on the back where the new addition is. We looked at this as kind of I guess, somewhat minimal demolition to try to look at what spaces we could reuse. Classrooms, as you know, are reasonably sized, but in this plan, what we see is it basically accommodates the grade 2-3 configuration, but does not accommodate the 2-3-4. There isn't enough room. We'd have to turn that new addition into 4 stories or more and increase it in length. What this does when we build new construction is put the new academic classrooms with good solar orientation, meaning they're facing north or south. That's better for learning. It's also better for energy efficiency. And you can see we show a very wide corridor in that new construction. It's not that we would necessarily have a 20-foot wide corridor, but the idea there is we're reserving space for pull-out and flexible learning, so a modern education environment really extends beyond the walls of the classroom. And so whenever you see new construction, you'll see that we're building in allowances to create 21st century learning environments. The next option goes a little bit further with new construction. So you can see we've demolished on the far left the 1-story academic classroom wing, and we've built a new 2-story classroom wing in addition to the classroom wing that on the previous option. So it creates an entire 2-story plan effectively for the academic areas. All the shared spaces, and this was true of the previous plan, are in the middle. So art, music, and science and tech spaces, as well as administration, are in that middle existing bar. And then we've got new classroom neighborhoods in the new construction. This also builds a brand new gymnasium and repurposes the existing cafeteria. Both options also build new kitchen and boiler room as part of the first phase, something that we'd have to do to logistically get the new construction up and running. This one, in theory, it doesn't really accommodate a grade 2-3-4 as well. This one would require a 3-story academic wing on the far left, which the upper floor would be a dead end. It really doesn't connect to anything, and probably about 4 stories for that shorter academic wing. In order to meet the program, it also would need a much larger gym and cafeteria. So it seems that in either one of the Ad Renos, it really only accommodates the grade 2-3, not the 2-3-4 option.
To say nothing, in fact, of what you're gonna do with the kids for the 2 years it takes to do that.
Right.
Right.
If you thought that had impact before.
So the duration of any ad renovation, unless you fully move them
I
all
understand.
off-site,
Yeah.
it would be longer than the other options
Right.
we'll look at in terms of relative. One of the other things I wanted to point out here on the dash left side of the screen here is the existing classroom wing that was a subsequent addition. And those of you that have been in the building know it's a much higher elevation. Walking around the back of the site or even looking around the drop-off, you see large boulders and outcroppings everywhere. So to do this option here with that new barbell at the top, you'd have to excavate down into what's essentially ledge, or we would believe would likely be ledge. So there would be ledge removal premiums associated with an option like this.
Wouldn't that essentially put your first floor underground as well?
Yeah, it'd be a garden level, we call it, Tim.
Garden level.
It'd be the garden.
The other thing with this one is if you can see the bold outline, there's very little of that existing building remaining here when this is all said and done. And not only, and it's not as though you're going to not punch a whole bunch of holes in that existing envelope as well. So there's going to be really just some columns and some deck that's going to be left over here at the end of the day with this kind of option.
And with this, the cost would probably lead to needing to do the whole ADA refitting anyways, right?
Yeah, this is all going to be full code upgrade to this.
Right, especially one of the differentiations between the prior option and this option is that, right? 'Cause the option before this, we're gonna go back one.
Yeah.
That still has that left wing at a much higher level, right? And you've got to solve that with ramps or internal elevators and lifts, where the second option tries to avoid that, but then you're digging into the ledge and providing a garden level experience to everybody.
So this is required, correct, that you look at your current school?
Yes.
At what point will there be a cost associated with this?
So when we get to that December 9th submission, we're going to have a relative cost. It's going to be based on historical kind of square foot cost. The new builds are much easier to do from obviously cost per square foot data. We'll do a deeper dive on whichever ad reno is still on the table at that point. You may trim one of these two, or we may end up with another refined version of one of these ones. It always comes up at town meeting because everybody wants to know, we have a residual asset, how do we maximize it? And so it's the due diligence we want to do so we can have that information and then also understand the swing space costs. Swing space being, what do we do with the students? Can we relocate them off-site or on-site? And what is the phased nature of construction? Because those are all cost drivers and duration drivers.
And the limitation is 2 and 3 only, 2, 3 only.
Essentially, what the
Yes.
design team is telling us, that based on the fact that the school was small to begin with, the ad rental options lend themselves to the 2-3 only and not the 2 to 4. And I believe that would be fine with the MSBA. I'm going to close the loop with them on that we're required to study the code upgrade, which is what is your existing building to get to current standards, and ad reno, and then any number of new construction options. So I think we're just going to study the one ad reno with the 2-3 configuration.
So
Do you show them both options, or do we pick an option?
You pick an option. So over the next, couple of meetings, whenever you're ready to whittle, it down to the one you want us to price at the end of November, we'll price that one.
So with the moderate renovation, if it's still 2 to 3, we're still talking 2 floors? Is that correct?
3, I think you were saying. Yeah. The wings, so the existing building would obviously be 2, but those new additions,
That's 2-story.
2.
that one's 2.
Yeah.
But the other one has,
So the other one. Do you still get all 3? No, I think that,
Yeah, because this one takes away the media center and some other space. You can see there's not a lot of classrooms on the second floor above that other wing.
Yeah, that's how they got it.
the reason I was asking is because if those wings are disconnected and we're talking about 3 floors, I would assume with ADA stuff, that means an elevator or something has to be added into those wings. And if they're not connected, that means 2 separate
Yep.
lifts, yeah.
And not to reopen the conversation, but this says ad reno does meet play space, bus queue, car queue, site targets.
Yes.
Without going into another 20-minute conversation about it, how?
Well, basically, that entire forest is being wiped out.
Okay.
so that's the
So
image.
that's how it happens. Is
Okay.
that you have all this this area is undeveloped right now. We would be ending up developing all of that
Okay.
to get there.
Gotcha.
I think what would be the best of both worlds, given the site constraints, is if you keep what you have is the current gymnasium, convert it to a cafeteria, build that kitchen space that you have at the bottom, and build a new gymnasium, knock down the rest of the school, make this part of the new school. That way the people that want to keep the Elmwood School get something,
Yep.
and you're going to need those things in the new school, right? You're going to need a cafeteria, you're going to need a gymnasium, so why not keep that piece of the school, arguably the newest part, add to it for the gymnasium and make it part of the new school, that footprint we keep talking about. And then the rest of it goes away. Of course, you'd still have the problem with the kids and construction.
So I would only be retaining just the gymnasium, basically.
Yeah,
right?
basically just the.
And only the shell, because it would change into a
Exactly, because we're
cafeteria.
converting to a cafeteria. But the big political thing is, yeah, we're trying to save as much, the best part of the school, we're saving it. We're not gonna build another cafeteria. And, you know, I'll just throw it out there, just, you gotta have a cafeteria. You got one already, just gotta convert it. But, you know, just something to think about it.
Someone will ask that question. You're right.
So we're happy to look at that. I think one of the things we anticipate in doing that is to phase it and to not
Yeah,
demolish the existing wing. You're
It's
really
not clean.
reaching to connect, but
Yeah, I know it's not clean, and,
At least we consider consideration.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
In the ad reno options, this includes like new HVAC systems, so this would be
oh, yeah.
all air
Everything.
controlled and
Everything,
everything
yeah.
still.
Yeah, you'll find that the cost for the building itself will be similar because you're bringing all new, and all you're saving is pieces of the skeleton, essentially, at the end of the day, because to get to the new energy code, you're reskinning the whole building, you're reskinning the roof, and you're replacing all the systems, so, you know, it'll end up close in cost proximity.
Well, you'd have to get creative in the existing building too, because those ceilings are low and there's no plenum in
You can
between.
be very
so-
creative in there, so sometimes these end up costing as much, if not slightly more,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, because of some of the things you need to do in order to work your way around some of the configurations that are existing in place now.
I think the Runkle School was 9'10" floor to floor, something like that.
I'm sorry?
The Runkle School, I think, was 9'10" floor to floor. It was
Yes,
really tough.
Yeah, that gives you enough
It's worse.
space. But,
So, did you get the feedback you needed
Yeah.
on those
Yeah.
tonight to come back next time?
Yep.
Right. So do you want to discuss the site selection process and then we'll talk about trails?
Sure. At our last meeting, we discussed the criteria that was established, and we've presented that at your last meeting, as well as the community forum and solicited feedback. The items here in the criteria, the project team will help provide the data for you guys to do your analysis in that January, February timeframe. After we're through our December shortlist, we'll be narrowing in on the remaining options, and that's the point at which we'll start to build the data that will fill in the construction schedule, duration, sustainability, construction impacts to the neighbors and students, traffic, parking and on-site circulation, permitting, school future growth and flexibility, which we hear is very important in this town, and certainly operations to the district, including busing, and then public safety considerations, site complexities, walk and bike ability, and then proximity to utilities and services are the criteria that we've talked about as the initial list. Through the next couple of meetings with yourselves and with the public in the community forums and the visioning sessions, if information comes up, we'll bring that back to you to fill out the list and additional. We like to put this in a graphical representation, which is what the next slide shows here, and something similar was done in Marathon. This becomes a working tool for the building committee and the project team to collect the data and work into the relative comparison of the options. So in this particular example, the options will be listed across the rows, across the columns, across the top, and the criteria is listed on the horizontal rows. And it'll be a tool that the building committee uses to collect your thoughts and think about the relativeness of each of the options as we narrow in on the recommended solution. The next slide shows how we kind of represent that. Instead of a hard grading, again, it's a relative exercise, so we go with a traffic light coloring, with a dark green, light green being the better recommended options, yellow being more of a neutral, and orange being on the slightly negative side, and red being very negative. This helps the building committee frame the discussion and have your ongoing conversation so that you can get to a conclusion that you want to recommend as a solution to bring back to the town. And this will occur over the month of January into the middle of February, when we envision the building committee would be at a point where you'd be ready to recommend a solution. We'll break some of these topics down in those January and February meetings, so we'll tackle some big and small topics in a couple of different meetings to allow sufficient time to churn through the data that we provide to you and kick the tires on all those things.
Excuse me. From the experience with Marathon, this is incredibly helpful and important tool, not just for our committee in terms of zeroing in on what is the site that we're going to go after, but also from the community engagement perspective, because it shows a very thorough analysis. We had examples in the last project of people who came up and said, I was 100% locked in that we had to keep this on the existing center school site, but looking at this matrix that you all researched thoroughly, I can see now why that doesn't make any sense. So this process will be a bit arduous in terms of going through all of these boxes, looking at the criteria, having some vigorous debate amongst ourselves about what constitutes red, green, yellow, orange, but it's probably one of the most valuable things that we will create to get that support from the town.
As a former UX person, can I ask a favor? Can you make a copy that's like colorblind friendly? So, with a key to what the colors mean.
Sure, yep.
So we can do the stoplight, and I don't mind that, but we should release a copy that.
We've done that in the past before in other towns. It's great to remind us that that's an end product that should be published.
Thank you.
Yeah, as I recall with Marathon, when we had the community meetings at the senior center, the architect made a presentation, and this thing was put out there, and actually the citizens were able to put colored tags on what their things, and that way they had some ownership, and we were able to say this is what the citizens wanted, and so it worked out pretty well that way. I don't know when that would happen, or maybe it'd be the visioning folks who would do it, but it would certainly be helpful.
I love the idea of those types of things.
I think potentially that could be into the January timeframe, where we would have this filled out, and we'd have
because then we'd know.
We'd have our narrowest set of sites,
and
we'd be getting to that point where, as a committee, we're going to take a vote to recommend, to pursue one. So,
And they may even have an option on TV like they did the other night, where they could actually vote by green, red, yellow, whatever they thought. Then it gets compiled, and hopefully it's a workable thing.
But I thought it was good to review that, just so the committee is clear on what are the process steps, because I think every time we see these test fits, we give feedback and they change a little bit more and they change a little bit more, but when are we going to have to really get to the nitty gritty of making decisions around what's going to be, which sites are going to check the most boxes and be the most important. So, okay. Any other questions on that? So before we get to the next public forum, I wanted to, I asked to have this put on the agenda. I was reading the reports from the most recent Upper Charles Trail Committee meeting. I don't know if people have followed the process of that project, but one of the things that's particularly relevant to us is that the feasibility study that they're looking at right now involves one of the parcels that we were just looking at. So those Hayden Row parcels are potentially impacted by a trail that they're looking to recommend to the town for construction. Whether or not the location of that trail would really interrupt the building site is unclear. Whether or not it would be close enough to be kind of a security concern of a new school building is also unclear. I thought if the committee was interested, it might make sense for I can write on behalf of the committee a letter just letting the Upper Charles Trail Committee know that location is under serious consideration for a new school project, so that they can take that into account as they move forward, and that we're just publicly out there saying this, we'd like this to be a consideration because we are thinking about putting a school there.
I think that would be great. The school committee has already previously informed them that that would be a possible site, so I think reinforcing the fact that yes, now that the ESBC2 exists and we are looking at test fits, this is actually becoming more possible.
Okay.
Is a really good idea.
So I'm happy to do that. I think for purposes of making it official, I'd love to get a motion and a vote from the committee to authorize the chair to draft and send a letter to the Upper Charles Trail Committee, letting them know that the sites at 0 Hayden Row and 129 Hayden Row are under consideration as possible sites for a new elementary school, which may impact the potential of a trail project.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Tiffany. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, unanimous. I will draft that letter, send it out, and I will obviously put, I'll send copies to the committee, but I'll also put it in our packet for the next meeting, so it's in public record. Okay. Then I think Community Forum on November 2nd is our next item.
We have a slide, but it basically, what we have is really just an agenda that maybe wants to be shaped a little bit further. We'd start off with, obviously, the welcome and go through the format of the forum. We always like to do a brief overview, again, just to reiterate some of the very broad aspects of the project, the overall timeline, the key milestones and decisions, and the scope. And then we thought we'd spend some time recapping, as we did tonight, what happened at the last community forum. The meat of what we would be presenting would be the preliminary studies, which includes, starts with the site and building program, as we saw tonight, goes into the renovation and addition studies, and then into the new construction test fits. So that takes us through a large portion of the presentation. And then if we feel ready to talk about system-wide, really instead of impact, probably considerations, what we could do is just map out very simply some of the configurations that may start to take shape with, of course, the 2 grade configurations we have for the Elmwood School project, and how that may also impact possibly 6th grade. And so we can chart maybe 3 very simple overall configuration thoughts, and maybe get some comment or feedback. And we could go deeper, but I don't know that we're ready to do that. We've started to gather some information and research, just understanding how the teaming works at each grade level, and understanding what literature says about various age level development and what might be appropriate. And so we'd be interested in getting community and feedback from visioning as well as from the ESBC on that. So that would be the overall agenda. I think that we've been doing about a 45-minute content piece, and then about 45 minutes of interactivity or question and answer. We haven't specifically built in anything from Mentimeter, but I think it may be a recommendation to do that, to engage the audience along the way at a few points, and that's something that we can also follow up on.
I'll open it up for general questions, but I want to zero in on the system-wide impact piece and just ask Dr. Kavanaugh in terms of your coordination with, because I know you're doing a lot of work to update the school committee on some of those changes, so I want to make sure that that's really obviously tightly coordinated in terms of the messaging, what you're comfortable having as part of the forum, et cetera.
Yes, I think what we're looking at for next week's forum is just to take a look at possible grade configurations. Certainly keep it at that 30,000 foot level, in a more detailed way. Bob, Mrs. Carver, and I have been, kind of collaborating on looking at pros and cons of those different grade levels, but that's not ready for public release.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's nice, because that was absolutely my question.
I figured
like,
that
is
one was
this gonna be-
flashing red, so I'd get it out on the table right away. But I assume there was some coordination because, you didn't come across the table at him or anything, so. But
No, we're all good.
other questions on the agenda then? Or comments, thoughts, things we should include or not include?
I think the Mentimeter is a nice way to engage people who are watching live. I wonder about if there's a way we could collect more information if we had some type of Google form or something that was left open for people who watch on HCAM later. And that might give us maybe even more indication of how many people have watched overall. And maybe those questions, mirror what we ask in the Mentimeter, or I'm not sure, but it might be something to consider just to see how many more people engaged with the community forum that weren't there in person.
I wonder if we leave a QR code, another QR code for like a Survey Monkey that we open up afterwards.
Something like that.
So that if someone can't, they can then go to the Survey Monkey, which will be open for like a week or whatever amount of time we think is appropriate.
Yeah.
Some kind of vehicle, other than the Mentimeter is obviously a live
Yeah.
Right.
exercise.
And you're right, it gives us an idea, and it also, I think, is more meaningful to the people who can't be there or participate live. They can get their feedback in an easy way, because clearly the email inbox
Yeah,
is
we
not
only had
driving
one
traffic.
question last time.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of really great questions in person, so maybe people are like, hey, I would have asked that, but they did. I don't know. But it's just something to think about. It also could be a way where we could provide a multilingual option. I know we had talked about that previously, but there is a way to do that in the Google form. And I'm sure there is on SurveyMonkey as well. I'm not as familiar.
That's a great idea.
Other thoughts, questions on the agenda? Format-wise, we're doing it the same way? The high school
High school
with the
auditorium, yep.
live broadcast on HCAM? Okay, then I guess that is our agenda for November 2nd. And then the last item on our meeting agenda tonight is just an update on upcoming meetings, which I don't think any have changed, right?
So, yeah, we need to talk about that, and then also the other item was the visioning session we have tomorrow.
Did I skip over that? I didn't see that. Okay.
Just an update on.
Okay. Why don't we do that first then?
The visioning first.
My apologies.
So, workshop one, unfortunately, I was away and wasn't here for some of the settling of the workshop, but the slide that we have shows the agenda for that. And it basically also begins with welcome and introductions with some meeting guidelines. Manuel put this together. I know he's worked with Carol on it. There's a facilitated conversation, which is the second agenda item, which is called Visioning Catalyst. And basically, that's basically to engage the audience about goals and aspirations. The third item is an overview of the visioning process, so about 15 minutes providing a project background, some of the exact content that we've done in the forums, or at least in the initial forums, including the visioning overall overview and goals and the MSBA process. The fourth item, actually we've included between 3 and 4, we're going to also bring the sustainability conversation into this. I think that it's important just to paint a picture and help define for those that don't know what we're talking about when we say sustainability and net zero. And then that'll lead right into project goals, which will also be a facilitated discussion. And it'll focus on strategic plan alignment, identifying goals and strategies, possible issues and obstacles, and ultimately maybe a first pass at guiding principles. The fifth exercise is then to look at what is important, not important for the future of schools. So those will be table discussions with reporting out. And then the sixth item is community engagement, a facilitated discussion on kind of what, who, when, how should we engage. It's kind of a table discussion as well. And then it concludes with a wrap-up and next steps. This session is about 2 hours long, 1.5 to 2 hours. I think we booked it for 2 hours. And then it will be followed by a visioning session, which is the longer session, which is a Saturday event. And then finally a third visioning workshop.
Any questions or thoughts?
Completely whimsically, will there be colored stickies?
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of colored
Perfect.
things. I actually haven't seen all of the content that Manuel has been providing. I know he's been speaking to Carol, but there seems to be a lot of really fun, interactive pieces and always colorful.
I think it looks like a great agenda. I'm excited for this process to get started, so it's exciting.
How many are being invited, or how many have been invited that responded to the?
What was our final number?
I think we're very close to 30, and we got in touch with the senior center, so we have one senior volunteer, and we have one high school student as well. And then there's obviously this group and the school committee, so.
And we had a really great list of community members who volunteered that we were able to select a really diverse group from, so.
And where is it being held?
Middle school,
But in the
library
library.
tomorrow.
So where we meet?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. We're back
Thanks.
there.
All right, anything else on that topic? So the last item on our agenda is future meetings. Obviously we have the visioning meeting, and then following that, we have the forum on November 2nd. Our next ESBC committee meeting is currently scheduled for Tuesday, November 8th at 6 p.m. right here at the HCAM studios. So everybody make sure you vote early.
Just want to confirm that,
Yeah.
that we're on despite the election, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Good.
Anything else anyone has for tonight?
So the next meeting after that would be the Tuesday, the 22nd, which would be the Tuesday before, Thanksgiving. So I just wanted to get that on everyone's calendar. I think those invites have gone out.
Okay. Do we want to move that meeting due to Thanksgiving week? It's the Tuesday before, so I don't think that's as typically problematic for people. Should we check and see what our responses have been? Maybe I can email Georgette tomorrow and see what responses have been, and if we have a lot of no's, we can look to move it. Okay.
All right, so we've put on the website the meeting calendar that we shared with you as part of your packet is now up on the website on the meetings and schedules tab. So that outlines the meetings that we're presenting and discussing tonight, which are the community forums, the visioning sessions, and the building committee meetings. And so putting that out there with the roadmap ahead so that they can follow along on that tab and try to color code it to separate the different groups so people can quickly discern what the different topics are that will be undertaken there.
Excellent.
Just wanted to be sure that we noted that the second visioning is on Saturday, November 5th.
Thank you. Yep, oversight on my part. That's a really good point. Yep.
That was just the one other November meeting.
Good.
All right. Well, if there are no other topics, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mike, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nobody's ever opposed to adjourning. So we are adjourned officially at 7:47 p.m. Thank you to HCAM for broadcasting, and thank you all for watching. Everyone have a good night.